Hello and welcome to the CFO Playbook podcast. I'm David McClelland. I'm a journalist and broadcaster. I cover technology and business with a special interest in startups. And here on CFO Playbook, we get under the skin of how world-class finance leaders from across various industries set goals, manage teams, leverage technology, plan for the future, and much, much more. And in today's episode, we hear from a finance leader who's held Chief Finance and Executive Officer positions across retail, manufacturing and financial services, and is now CEO at management consultancy Shape Beyond, Helen Ashton.
The business was growing at about 30% top-line growth every year. It was about a $6 billion market cap business. We were global, building warehouses, investing heavily into technology. How do we use systems and data and more governance and structure to put some level of control around the business, but not dampen down the entrepreneurial spirit?
If you're listening to CFO Playbook for the first time, then welcome. Don't forget to subscribe, have a listen through our extensive back catalogue, and let us know what you'd like us to cover next over on LinkedIn. Right, on with the show.
This episode of the CFO Playbook is brought to you by Soldo. Thousands of businesses from small to large corporations, including Mercedes-Benz, Sony, and Get Your Guide, use Soldo to make their business spending simple and efficient. To find out more or to book a demo, visit soldo.com.
Helen Ashton's varied career in senior finance and leadership positions has spanned more than 3 decades across a wealth of sectors, from financial services, Barclaycard International, Lloyds Banking Group, to fashion retail as CFO at leading online retailer ASOS, via commercial catering and laundry equipment as Group CEO at JLA. She now heads up management consultancy Shape Beyond, which she founded in 2020, and continues to advise and hold non-executive director roles, including at JD Sports Fashion. Helen, thank you for joining us on CFO Playbook. Good to meet you. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. Great to meet you as well, David.
In a nutshell, you've been quite busy. Your CV is absolutely crammed with lots of different experiences across a real variety of sectors there. And I'm curious, with your finance leader hat on, how important do you think that cross-sector experience is? Because the traditional, the perceived wisdom, and I was looking up on some headhunting recruitment sites for some insights into this, is that for some sectors, sector-specific industry experience is invaluable, along with that ability to hit the ground running. You know, we always see industry experience on job specs all the time, don't we? So I'm curious what your perspective is about that specific industry grounding versus having the diverse experiences across multiple sectors.
I think I have never bought into the fact that you have to be an expert in any one industry. And I think things are changing. I think people are getting more open-minded around people who've moved to different sectors. But personally, I mean, I wouldn't go back and change anything in my career. I think every industry I've worked in, every business I've worked in, I've learned something. And I think that it's amazing how similar the issues that a finance director will have, regardless of what the industry is or what the company is or the size of the company. The challenges are usually pretty similar. And therefore, I think that to be a really effective finance leader, it's all about being able to influence people and build relationships. And I think by moving to different industries, you get to learn how to do that. You meet different people, different cultures, and you see lots of different ways of doing things. And I think it's building up that toolkit of what has worked, what hasn't worked, that is going to become more and more important for CFOs going forward. So, yeah, if anybody ever looks at my CV and says to me, "Oh, you know, you've jumped to different industries," I'll say, "Yeah, I have," and I'd go back and do it again. And I've been incredibly lucky and And, you know, the breadth that I've seen and the experience I've had has been amazing.
Lucky, I believe you make your own luck. That's a key part of it. To what extent have you sought out throughout your career these different experiences? This has been a conscious decision, I guess, on your part. It's not just luck.
I hate to say it, but I think that luck does come into it. You know, I think, you know, I would love to say I'm one of those people that had a long-term career plan. I really didn't. I studied accountancy because I'm really squeamish, and being a doctor was something that I just couldn't get my head around.
Well, you studied biology, am I right, or was it chemistry? Chemistry, right,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So, you know, I went into finance because it was like, oh, God, you know, that seems like a responsible thing to do. Nothing more than that. And, you know, and I, you know, I think finance is a great training ground for business, because when it comes down to it, you've got to come back to the numbers all of the time. So, you know, I think that's great, but it hasn't been the basics of finance or accounting that is what has, you know, been the thing that I'm most proud of my career. You know, for me, it's the leadership, the being able to be involved in the strategy of a business, being able to really create value and make a change. And with the best will in the world, you know, I'd love to say that I planned my career, but I really kind of have just taken the opportunities that have come up and been open to giving things a go that maybe people would have said, actually, that doesn't sound like a great idea. I've never been too worried about going into a business that, say, was having problems, or, you know, somebody thought was, you know, could be bad for my reputation, or, you know, any of those traditional things. I kind of have always rebelled against that and gone, well, that sounds like quite good fun, actually. I'm kind of quite up for that. So sometimes I think I've maybe taken an opportunity that some other people maybe wouldn't have. And again, I just, I don't like a boring life. So I think, you know, I think you grab the opportunities, and some of them work out and some of them work out a bit less, but you always learn from all of them.
So back to that piece about the breadth and why it can be a positive thing for a business to hire senior leaders, senior finance leaders with experience from different sectors. You spoke about some of the values, obviously from your point of view, the transferable skills. A lot of those are universal. What have you observed when that hasn't happened, where you do see organizations that are intent on recruiting like for like, or people who have spent the 20, 30 years within the industry? What limitations would you say that they have as a result of that approach?
I mean, there's no doubt about it that if you hire somebody from an industry that knows about an industry in and out and have worked and lived in that industry forever, you know, you will get a quick fix on the ground quickly. Somebody who can understand the business quickly and say, you know, this is best practice in this industry. So, you know, I can absolutely see the benefit of that. And I think that many businesses, particularly when they're recruiting at, say, C-suite or board level, they want to minimize the risk of recruiting somebody, and therefore private equity do it as well. They'll go, oh, it's less risky to take somebody who's done private equity before, have come from the industry that we're looking at. Maybe it is. You're limiting the downside, but I also think you limit the upside. And for me, I'm just more of an upside kind of person. And therefore, you know, I don't really think that, you know, you should be looking for people who are just going to do the same. You're looking for people who've seen lots of different things and how you apply those in different ways. So a good example would be, you know, when I worked in financial services, in banking, I was in credit cards, and actually the way that people look at things like propensity to pay some of the algorithms that were being used there were really quite advanced. And yet, when I went into ASOS 10 years later, you kind of think, well, how could you use that learning? But you're like, well, it's great, because actually all you want to do for an online shopping business is look at the propensity for somebody to buy an outfit or an item. So therefore, all you're doing is you're taking the learning off. Well, actually, if that's already there in financial services and it's built, why can't we just take that, lift that, and change it for what we need it to be? The basics are still the same. And I think it's the same now with things like digital. If I think about what we were doing at ASOS around data, digital, customer experience, I use that in pretty much all of the work that I do now, because what business isn't looking to move digital or looking to, build on customer experience? It doesn't really matter about the industry. Those basics can be applied. You just got to have that ability to pick up things and sort of piece them into something that could work for a different business.
So your character traits, like you say, you are a positive person, ambitious, and clearly see opportunities where others see risk, and that's led to this varied career that you've had to this point. How do you, when you are moving from one sector to another, and I'll couch this not necessarily based on your experience, but based upon maybe advice for other finance leaders who are listening to our show today. How can you help yourself to feel confidence, and how can you inspire confidence in those around you, that you aren't that fish out of water, that you do have the ability to hit the ground running if you are moving from, say, retail to manufacturing or vice versa?
I think the great thing about being a finance leader is you've got a functional specialism. And therefore, when you go in and sit around an executive table or a board table, really, there's probably not any question that somebody's going to be able to raise to you that from a finance perspective, you can't answer that question. So the fact that you are going to take some time to learn about the industry and the company is almost second to the fact that, you are going to sit down and, you are going to have to do a year end, and you're going to have to do monthly management accounts, and you're going to have to do the tax and the VAT and all of that sort of stuff. So I think that's a great thing, that for me, it doesn't really matter how big the business is, how small it is, what the sector is. They've all got to follow the same finance rhythms. They will all have challenges around data. They'll all have challenges around the technology. They'll all have challenges around being able to recruit great people. They'll all have challenges around, forecasting or treasury management. They all will. And therefore, when you land, you kind of can get your head around those. So when I arrived at ASOS, they were about to report the full year results 6 weeks after I arrived. So you're in a position where you're closing the accounts. It's a listed business. So 6 weeks after, you're in front of, analysts, and you're going to have to answer questions. Now, of course, you don't know that much about the business. So but you have got credibility as being a finance leader. So I think that's the great thing. I always come back to that as a core, and then you can learn the other pieces on top of that.
Is your sense that HR headhunters, hiring managers, are as open to hiring outside the sectors that they work in as they might be? And if any people responsible for hiring right now were listening, what would you say to them to encourage them to be more open, maybe more creative in their thinking around recruitment?
I don't think people are that open, to be really honest with you. I think that headhunters have a real opportunity to really challenge, private equity firms or boards or, CEOs when they go and say, I want a CFO that has done this, and this. And by the way, I want them based in, Bristol 5 days a week, and I want blah, 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 blah. I just think that sometimes when by the time you look at all of the requirements, you're looking for a unicorn that just doesn't exist. And I just think for me, there's a piece around hiring for, skill set and cultural fit. For me, that probably is the most important thing, that cultural fit. Is this person going to be able to work with the executive team? Are they going to be able to influence in the business? And so I don't think that people are as open as they could be. And I think the other thing with that is, I think that people don't understand that often by being so specific about what they need, they're indirectly discriminating as well. So say, for instance, if there's a job where, they're saying, right, you need to be 5 days a week in Bristol, if somebody came to me and said, what do you think of that? I'd say, not a hope in hell. I'm not going to living in Bristol for 5 days.
Nothing against Bristol, but it's not where you live right now.
Nothing against Bristol, at all. So again, I just think that people could be way more open. And I think that what we'll find is that they'll have to be, because I just think that there are really good senior finance people are actually really hard to find. And actually, you've got to, good finance leaders have a choice. They have a choice of the kind of organisation they work in, how many days they've got to be in the office, what that looks like, how much the team is invested in. There's so many things now that I think that it's going to be really get harder and harder to recruit good finance people. So people are going to have to be more open.
I think we were all kind of hoping after the pandemic that we saw recruitment change during the pandemic, I think, whereby, remote working, flexible working was much more part and parcel. Unfortunately, it seems to me, and stories that I'm increasingly hearing, is that the pendulum is swinging back towards more traditional ways of working, which, as you say, really, really narrows the pool from which you can hire talent.
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely does. And, I suspect what will happen, as you said, the pendulum will swing over and then it will come back to kind of, something a bit more balanced. But, when I look at, so I've got 5 children, 4 girls and a boy. And, if I ask any of them whether they would consider doing a finance career going forward, they look at me and say, why on earth, would I want to do a finance job? It's dull, it's boring. You're sat in an office in front of the computer all of the time. I want to do sustainability, or I want to do data, or I want to do, all of these things. And therefore, I just think that, again, getting great people into finance is become more and more of a challenge when there's, that there are plenty of other things that people maybe would rather do.
You've sown a seed in my head for a future conversation to have here on CFO Playbook with regards to some of those attitudes to finance at a much earlier stage, and how we ensure that continued flow of talent into the industry. And actually, there is something we'll come on to later on with regards to diversity, equity and inclusion, and some of the challenges that we see there that might play into that. But we'll park that for now. And I want to take a look next at one of the sectors that you've worked in more than once, and indeed you have more than a toe in the water of right now, retail, in particular, fashion retail. Now, you were CFO at ASOS, and I rediscovered today that when it was founded, ASOS was as seen on screen, and it offered customers the opportunity to buy imitations of clothing worn by stars in film and TV series. You were CFO there for about 3 years, 2015, 2018, during which time ASOS established itself as the UK's leading online fashion beauty retailer. But fashion retail is notoriously fickle, and during your time leading finance there, ASOS also faced some challenging market headwinds. So I'm curious, Helen, tell me about some of the ways that you were able to innovate in your time as CFO at ASOS, particularly around technology, around data, to try and ride those storms and find those new pockets of value?
ASOS, is an incredible business with incredible teams of people. Average age there of about 23, 24, so very young. Before that, I'd worked in financial services. Well, the average age was kind of in the 40s. So that in itself was quite a shift. Now, when I went into that business, the board was specifically looking for somebody with more of a corporate background, because the business at that point was kind of 15 years old, and it was already pretty big, but it was needing to professionalize, which is pretty much what all businesses go through at some point. So I went in with a remit really to think about how do we position the business to scale going forward. And it was a tremendous journey, because at that point in time, the business was growing at about 30% top line growth every year. It was about 6 billion market cap business. We were global, building warehouses, investing heavily into technology as well. So I think for me, the key was around how do we use systems and data and more governance and structure to put some level of control around the business, but not dampen down the entrepreneurial spirit, and that's really hard, because when you think of corporate, you think of bureaucracy. And it was like, how do you balance that? How do you get that right? And also, when you've had a business that's so successful, how do you convince people that they have to change and do things differently? And I think for me, a lot of what we focused on was ASOS was really passionate about its purpose. It was the first business I'd really worked at that purpose was absolutely core to everything they did. And the purpose there was around making 20-somethings look and feel their best. I still remember it now. And everybody absolutely did that. Everybody in the organisation, their job was to make 20-somethings look and feel their best. And if you were to speak to one of them, you would say, tell me why you love ASOS. And they'll come up with loads and loads of, really emotional stories about how they've really made a difference for people. So people were really committed to the business. So for me then, when you think about how you professionalize the business, you can position it more around how do we position ourselves so that we can do the best for the customer? How do we make life for the customer even better? So, a good example would be, people used to complain that there was 500,000 SKUs on the website. You can't find what you need. Well, fine. Why don't we then use our data to build an algorithm for recommendations for people so that they can see stuff more easily? So again, you could position things really quite quickly. The same for, we need to be able to forecast more effectively. We need better data, because if we can forecast more effectively, we can then work out how we invest more in the customer more quickly. And, how do we get a better grip on the numbers? Because then we can be much quicker with the decision making that we're using. So I think, and then obviously from a scale perspective, that business was still using really old-fashioned, homegrown systems. So again, we were going through a really big replatforming program there. I put in Microsoft Dynamics 365. We were putting in Retail Oracle as well, and really moving everything to the cloud, much more microservices architecture, because you wanted a platform that was scalable, but also much more adaptable and something you could change really quickly to sort of stay ahead of the customer. So for me, I learned a huge amount around, how do you use data and technology to actually enable the business to give the customers way, way better service. And I think when you take people on that journey of how this is helping them to do a better job for the customer, then actually people get it, and people will put up with the fact that putting in systems is a bit of a nightmare, and it usually goes wrong and it's hard yards. But if they can see the end of the tunnel, they're kind of much more open to it, I think.
I've been on that journey from working in much larger corporates and then working for a startup about 12 or 13 years or so ago that eventually got bought by a big technology firm with 3 letters in its name. And that period of transition being, from physically moving into a different office that wasn't a barn in a garden centre in Maidenhead to working in big corporate offices again. And then the processes, the growing up, as you put it, becoming more corporate. It was really, really challenging for those of us working in the organisation, because a lot of what we thought it was that made us cool, that made us attractive to acquire in the first place, that agility, that innovative approach, we felt was being hindered, held back, restrictive. And I can understand from where ASOS was on its journey, born around 2000 to that 15-year mark, where it's like, right, we kind of really need to grow up here. And then your role leading finance there at the time, trying to mature the processes, but also the technologies on, which underpin that business. I can understand that there probably would have been quite a bit of pushback there. But it sounds to me, from how you described how you were able to mature the company, that it wasn't just the numbers that you were looking at. You spoke about Microsoft Dynamics. You spoke about the different areas of recommendation engines for customers there. You, whilst in finance, really had a very broad outlook on the business as a whole there. Then that sounds to be really important for that stage where ASOS was at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I was incredibly fortunate to work with other brilliant execs. So, the CTO ASOS, who's still there now, but, he was superb, and we worked really, really closely together. So you're kind of finding your way together. It was an executive team that, were pretty nimble. But again, we had a lot of fun along the way, and we didn't take things too seriously. And we made decisions really, really quickly. And, there was always that, is it right for the customer? Is it right? If it's right for the customer, then, tell me why we shouldn't be doing that. It was probably the most customer-centric business that I've been in. It was the most fast from a decision-making perspective. And if things went a bit wrong, it was kind of all right. It was like, let's give it a try. Does it work? Does it not? And that's quite hard as well from finance people, because if you're signing off a business case to spend 100 million on a warehouse, that's quite straightforward, because you know that if you automate it and whatever, you're going to get this back and it's all going to pay back. But when you're talking about, let's invest in an algorithm, or let's invest in, augmented reality technology that we have no idea whether we're actually ever going to use it or not. How, as a finance leader, do you do a business case on that? How do you get your head around that? And I think, again, you've got to get much better at understanding that, being happy with ambiguity, and being happy that actually, and I say it a lot now, I less worry about an outcome and I'm more worry about, are we just heading in the right direction, right? Everything is a journey, and it's like, just give it a go, just do something, and then we'll go again. You don't have to sign up forever. So for me, these ideas now, budgets and an annual budget, personally, I think they're pretty much a waste of time, because actually life, particularly in, any consumer-facing, fast-moving, within a week, a budget can, everything changes, and you've got to rebase off what you've learned. So yeah, I think, yes, I had a broad view. I was, again, one of the reasons I wanted to go into ASOS was I didn't just have finance. I had data, investor relations, procurement, facilities for my sins. You had so much stuff. And I loved that. But ultimately, nobody was precious. You didn't have a CTO going, that's my job. And we all work together and try to find our way. But I mean, as a finance person, in my mind, you've got to understand the breadth of the business. You've got to understand how all the pieces come together, because you've got to kind of allocate the resources and then get out of the way for people to get on and do what they need to. So you've got to be able to weigh up how everything fits together. It's incredibly important.
So you speak about the transferable skills that CFO, and certainly you've picked up on the different stops on your journey so far. What would you say is the most important or surprising insight or learning you took away from your time at ASOS then?
The thing that I think struck me, and it might have been because I'd gone from banking where the average age was probably in the 40s, and I was constantly giving out 20-year service awards, 25, 30-year service awards. And it's easy to get into your mind that a good team has masses of experience. And then you go to ASOS and, as I said, the team are kind of in their 20s. And actually a lot of females, easily half female, if not more females to male. In banking, you tend to not have as much of that. But the team was pretty young, but boy, were they good. If I think back to that team, there was some amazing, amazing people in that team. And I remember saying to one lady, you could do my job in the future. You absolutely, if you wanted to, you could do the CFO job. And I remember her saying to me, why on earth would I want to do your job? You never see your kids. You look, you just constantly harass left, right and centre. They're like, why would that be something I would want to do? And I think for me, experience, I think in finance helps because you've seen things before, but actually giving people a shot, pushing them out of their comfort zones, putting them into roles that, historically you'd go, oh God, they can't do that. They haven't got the experience to do it. Give people a go, because actually they really can surprise you. And, some of the individuals there, oh my God, just, and they were in their 20s, but amazing, amazing, amazing people. They were so passionate about doing a brilliant job. And I think that is quite a rare thing in finance teams. And, now when I see individuals from that team going on to be CFOs for other businesses, I just think it makes you immensely proud, because these are the big CFOs of the future that I had the honour of having in my team for a period of time, which was amazing.
Remind me of the brand mission for ASOS. You mentioned it earlier on about, was it helping people in their 20s to be their best dressed or something?
20-somethings look and feel their best. And it was amazing because, the people in your team were 20-somethings. I mean, they were, the people working in ASOS were the biggest brand advocates, and I think that's a really interesting thing to remember, that when you're in a business and you look at your customer, and I think it now actually when I'm on a board as well, when I'm on boards, and I'll tend to say, we're all looking around the table and we're looking at everybody's experience and we're all ticking off, have we done this and have we done that and, all the rest of it. But then when you look at your customer and you think our customer is 16 to 24, and yet I'm looking around the table and like I'm 51 and I'm the youngest around the table. And quite frankly, what I think is very different to what a 16-year-old thinks. And I think, again, there's something there around how we start to understand that finance teams, they need to fit with the kind of business it is, the customer, that it's balancing that with tenure and experience, I think.
That was exactly the point that I hope you would get to, from how you described your team, ASOS as a workforce as a whole being this vibrant 20s workforce. That seems very reflective of, very representative of the market in which ASOS operates, and I think that moves us nicely onto the kind of final part of the conversation that I wanted to have today. And here on CFO Playbook, we do our best to be as diverse and as equitable as we can with our guests and the conversations that we have. The finance industry itself, though, in leading US and UK companies, men hold between 85 to 90% of CFO roles, and that's despite entry-level roles into finance seeing much more of a 50-50 gender split. So this comes back to the point we're making earlier on about pathways, entrance into the industry, and kind of what changes there. Helen, data says one thing though, but what's been your experience of being a female finance leader in this industry across multiple sectors, but in finance over the last 20-25 years or so?
I would like to say that it's changed a lot. I'm not sure it really has, to be honest, which makes me sound really old when I say like 30 years ago, but a lot of the same challenges, I think, were there then as they are now. You know, I actually think that the younger generation of finance leaders coming through are way more tolerant of each other from a diversity perspective. They are more inclusive. I think at the C-suite and a board level, I still think it's quite old-fashioned in terms of diversity. And I think that's quite interesting because, you know, a lot of boards or C-suites will talk about, you know, inclusivity and diversity. You know, we're all up for that and all of the rest of it. But the reality is it's not about policies. It's about the actions you take and what you do day to day. And I think, you know, as I said earlier, I don't think that people mean it badly from an inclusivity perspective. I think they just don't think sometimes. So as I said earlier, around when you're speccing out a role and, you know, you're thinking about, you know, demanding that somebody works, you know, in Bristol 5 days a week, it is likely that women with children are going to think twice potentially about doing that. I would, because that would just be the call that I would make. In the same way, I think it's quite interesting, you know, when you think about doing performance management, which everybody now does, of course, but 30 years I've had performance management with people saying to me, you need to be less emotional. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I think you need to be more emotional. But what are you saying? What you're saying is, I need to be more like you. And it probably has taken me 30 years to work out that I actually am quite happy being me. And actually what comes with that is what makes me me. But I do think at senior level, finance leaders are still expected to act in a specific way, in a specific stereotype as well. So I think some of the younger generation coming through are much more able to be authentic and to bring themselves to the role. And I think there's going to be this generational shift, I think, that actually, you know, I think people will become more open-minded. But I'm at a senior level. Yeah, I think people talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. I think, you know, it's going to take a long time, I think, for that to play through.
Yeah, I guess as much as the world is speeding up around us and digitization playing its role in that, there's one thing that doesn't change, and that's time, and that's how long it takes a human to get older and to move into different parts of organizations. I'm curious as to whether your experiences differ between different industries, because from a .com ASOS to financial services firms that have been established hundreds of years ago to PE-backed outfits like JLA. Do you see they have differences? One would expect that a .com company, as you alluded to a moment ago, might have a little bit more diversity kind of baked in from the beginning, because it doesn't have those decades, centuries of heritage of behaviors and patterns.
You know what? I think a lot comes down to the leadership in a business, because ultimately the most senior leaders in the business are the ones that set what is acceptable and what isn't. And I think you can get different challenges, I think, in different organizations, because there are slightly different challenges with something like ASOS. So if you're working in a business that the average age is in the 20s, and you're a CFO that's 45, that brings challenges, because your team will tend to be, out having a drink on a Thursday night till what time in the morning, and what is what works in that organization tends to be a little bit different. So I think every organization has its norms that you've got to try to navigate your way through, and it's about how do you keep true to your own values, and how do you fit in a way that you still feel comfortable with that. And I think that's a really big learning for me, that actually, instead of trying to force yourself to fit into an organization, sometimes you should say, this isn't actually the organization for me. I want to go and do something else. Because I think when you do find a fit, you know that you've found a fit. It's easy. I think sometimes when you're there and you're going, I'm trying really hard, but I'm losing sense of who I am. I think for me, I was always brought up to just try harder, it'll be fine. I think, again, the younger generations coming through are less tolerant of that. They'll go, you know what, if you're not giving me what I need and this isn't what I want, I'm going to go and do something different. But ultimately, I think you're right. I mean, my daughter is my eldest daughter's a junior doctor, and she gets really cross because she goes on her ward rounds in the hospital with her partner, who's a man, and the elder patients always call her the nurse and him the doctor, and she gets really cross. And a year in now to working in the hospital, she says, you know what, it doesn't bother me anymore. They're just that is the way that people think. It doesn't matter what I say or whatever I do. It is just a mentality that people have, and actually it will take some time for that to move through. But the only thing, somebody once said to me, I used to get cross, particularly when people rang me about non-exec jobs, and they said, this business has got a quota and it needs another female non-exec. Would you be interested? And I used to be like, absolutely not. If you'd have rang me and said, I could bring something to that business, but not just because I'm a woman. And then a board member said to me, but Helen, that is an opportunity to get onto a board and show people what actually women and, minority groups can bring that's different. So I know it can be frustrating, but actually things will only change when actually you get in there and you roll your sleeves up.
Two very quick final things. I noticed that you are a judge on the Hot Topics 2024 Global CFO 100 Awards to try and find these top CFOs, maybe a nod towards the next generation of finance leaders like we've been speaking about today. What sort of thing, very quickly, will you be looking for as you assess the entries there?
I think for me, it'll be looking for the breadth of thinking, those finance leaders who can create value in organizations. They're not just there to think about the historic numbers. They're there to work in a partnership with the CEO and the board and the executive team to think about strategy and think about digitalization and think about, value creation going forward. So I think that breadth is really important. And I think leadership as well. I think it's so easy for people to say, well, finance people are quite introverted and, they don't need to be leaders. They're just good with the numbers. I don't think that that's enough. Now, in these big leadership roles, you have such an opportunity to influence externally and internally, and actually recruiting and bringing along that finance talent is going to be increasingly tricky. So I think it's that breadth, the leadership as well, I think is what I'll be looking for.
Finally, Helen, a question we ask to every guest on CFO Playbook is what liberating finance means to them and how by doing so it might enable them or us to accomplish more. So, Helen, I put that question to you. What does liberate finance mean for you?
I've talked before about the fact that I think finance needs a rebrand. Everybody that I speak to, for many, if anybody asks you what you do for a living, I mean, the minute you say you're an accountant, I mean, it's not that, great. And as I said, when I talk to my daughters, I talk to younger generation, this idea of working in finance just brings this real idea of dullness and boring kind of a kind of role. And yet I look back at my finance career and I just think it's the most exciting thing that anybody can do because you've got access to everything. You learn all of the time. I've had 30 years of learning constantly. Everything is now more ambiguous. You've got to be quicker. You've got to be more nimble. You've got to understand things more. So for me, I just think there is a real opportunity for us to think about what the finance functions of the future are actually going to look like. Because through systems and data, a lot of the crappy, boring stuff that you would have done previously can all be automated. So actually that makes the roles that we're going to be doing even more interesting and much more partnership and much more forward-looking and value-creating. So yeah, I think finance needs a bit of a rebrand because we need to make it sexy. That's what we need to do. We need to give it a bit more, get a bit of a zhuzh up, I think. And I think that would really liberate finance because I just think we need to change the expectations of what finance can do in organizations because they can do a lot more than just producing the numbers.
Sexy finance. Thank you for sharing your journey with us today. It's been anything but dull and boring. Helen Ashton, thank you for joining us on CFO Playbook Podcast.
Thank you.